I grew up speaking Spanish when I was growing up, and when my parents first came here, my parents were immigrants in the country, and they're both from Mexico. So I am pretty attached to Spanish. It's basically my entire life. I mix Spanish and English all the time. That's part of my identity, and it is part of my heritage and my culture. So it's very important to me in terms of like when I speak to my family members, when I'm speaking to people in school, it reminds me of home and comfort, and especially like coming to university, it makes me feel like I belong with my friends, or that I have a place here at DU and anywhere else that I go. So that's why Spanish is very important to me. It represents me and how I show myself to other people.
My name is Lina Reznicek-Parrado, and I'm a professor of Spanish here at the University of Denver, as well as the director of the Spanish for Heritage and Bilingual Speakers here at our institution. I've dedicated my career to working with this important student population since, traditionally speaking, our field and throughout most of the institutions in the United States, we've offered little curricular opportunities for students with such unique linguistic and cultural experiences as students who speak Spanish as a heritage language. That, to me, has a lot of implications for the academic success of our students.
Spanish is really relevant to me. My parents are from Guadalajara, Mexico, so it's a big part of me. Growing up, Spanish, that's all I did, spoke. Everything we did was all Spanish. Till this day, my parents still speak Spanish, so it's part of me, it's part of my culture, it's how I identify myself, so it's something really big that it's part of me.
A Spanish heritage language student is different from a traditional second language student in a variety of ways. First, their oral proficiency is very developed. Our students have, for the most part, an intimate relationship with Spanish, since it is the language they use to communicate orally with their families or with their communities, whether those be in the U.S. or in the country of origin of their families. Because of this, they have an impressive oral command of the language, including the use of different varieties of Spanish depending on their country of origin or that of their families. Secondly, since the majority of them have not been schooled in Spanish and also coexist in a society where English is the language of prestige, as well as the language mostly used in schools, they present important challenges in terms of their literacy skills. So this includes formal or academic writing, knowing how to use a variety of registers, including those which are formal, in order to access public professional spaces of interaction and the like. Also, since all of our students are bilingual and have linguistic abilities both in Spanish and English, meaning they use two languages to express themselves, they consistently produce code switches and other linguistic phenomena of languages in contact, making their linguistic interactions quite unique. So, for all of these reasons, as well as many others, we choose to offer courses which are specifically designed for this student population, and we try not to expose them to the traditional Spanish curriculum, at least in the early stages of the program. The benefits of this effort are highly documented in the research, and not just for the linguistic gains that students have in Spanish, but also because of the educational benefits of students having a space where they meet other heritage speakers and realize they're not the only ones with this experience, and where they may find a new motivation to continue furthering their Spanish skills, which is clearly beneficial for their professional future, regardless of the profession they choose, especially now that Spanish is the minority language which is most widely spoken here in the U.S.
I think it's very important to take a Spanish heritage class, just because when you take a normal Spanish class, you are bored all the time, and you literally have to sit there and pretend like you like the material, but you don't, and that's very annoying. And I don't know, taking the Spanish heritage class was very interesting to me, because I got to be in a room with people who have the same experiences as me, and also I got to learn about other experiences that people had with Spanish that I hadn't thought about before I went into the class. And I mean, Spanish is a language that was taken away from us like at a certain point in the United States, and I was able to talk to people who actually experienced that from like their own grandparents, and now because of that they aren't able to speak Spanish. And I think that's something very important for us as Hispanic or Latinx people to be able to learn about in a classroom. And also, I mean, you get to learn about things that are happening in other Spanish-speaking countries that you wouldn't normally get to do if you were taking like a normal Spanish class.
Yes, completely. This class helped me with my grammar, even by just texting. Before, I would just text whatever in Spanish. There's a saying in Spanish that says, como caiga, which means, just let it, just go with the flow. But this time I actually take time and actually, put the accents, and makes a big difference. Maybe people might not understand what I'm saying, but with the accents, it's a big changer.
Grammar certainly is important for this type of course. However, we try for it to not have priority. Explicit grammar teaching is productive to a certain extent, but since the majority of our students have never studied Spanish grammar in a formal school context, we try to approach grammar through a particular context, like when we are discussing or writing about a topic of interest. Now, there are certain grammar topics that, at least for me, are important to teach in a more traditional way, but these are closely related to the specific linguistic needs of students. For example, we don't really teach the difference between, say, the preterite and the imperfect, since it isn't clear how this metalinguistic knowledge contributes to students' linguistic development. Also, despite not knowing these linguistic labels, students can already speak in the past tense without trouble. So we instead teach, for example, written accents in Spanish or semantic differences between words which sound the same but are written different and things like that, which are topics that are crucial for academic writing specifically. Other than this type of grammar topics, it is also essential to cover basic literacy topics, such as writing a proper thesis, developing sound main arguments, incorporating outside sources, writing a works cited page, using the passive voice in Spanish, etc. All of these aspects of written language are especially important for our heritage students. I've had the privilege of working with heritage students throughout my training, starting in North Carolina, then in California, and most recently here in Colorado, and I continue to be absolutely convinced that this student population deserves a language experience that is much more equitable. That up until now, if we don't intentionally invest in curricular opportunities for these students, we're taking away their right for a decent education. And at least for me, there is no greater mission than offering the best possible academic experience to all my students, whether they be heritage speakers or not.
I would definitely recommend for other students to take a Hispanic or like a Hispanic heritage course in Spanish, because I think it is like very important to be with your peers and to be able to like talk the Spanish that you talk at home, because we all obviously talk different types of Spanish when we're in front of different people. Like when you're at home, you speak a Spanish that's like, I guess, more people what they don't deem as like, I don't know, worthy. And then like in your classroom, you're able to speak that type of Spanish, but also learn about like, oh, maybe like when you're talking to like a professor, you shouldn't be saying those type of words. Or when you're at a professional like networking event, you could learn about those things. So I don't know, just the culture, the connection that you have between like also a professor who's like Hispanic as well is very important. Like you feel like you belong on campus, especially like as minorities. I feel like it is like something very cool to be able to sit in a classroom and look around and everyone around you like speaks Spanish. That's, I don't know. To me, that sounds pretty cool. Like all my I always look forward to going to class because I was like, that's the only place where I know I'm not the only person of color in the room, and that makes me happy because then I don't feel lonely. So, yeah.